discussion. And I really believe that this discussion will help move us forward and help us understand the best practices that we shared during the pandemic. All of those things, those pivotal important moments in the last couple of years that the world has been going chaotic. And so I'd like to ask Ed if he can please bring up the panelists and introduce them. Thank you. Awesome.
Tamaskat no Pasquiake Ocean. Menuin tenista. Kagin tumagayan. Te pewichu gamagie. Te pewichu gamasianista. I'm from the Paw, Manitoba, and I'll have to tell you that this is amazing what you've done. From Jen to all the workers, you've done a marvelous job from what I've seen. I want to, at this time, call on the 4 individuals that I'm going to be working with here this morning. We're going to be looking at the experiences, the sacrifices, and the impacts of the residential health support workers during the pandemic. They played a significant role in so many people's lives. So without further ado, I'm going to call on you, Eva, if you can come and take a seat up here. And as you come up here, there's a microphone there. And I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about yourself. Please make welcome my friend Eva. There's a seat there. Have a mic. Okay. The mic is turned on. Did you hear me whispering? I whisper loud, huh? Boy, I practice this name all night. Elisipa. Practice this name all night. Elisipi. Ah, you're a beautiful woman, Elisipi. She was so gracious as I tripped and stumbled over that beautiful name. Viola, please make your way to the stage. Come and grab a seat. I'm going to ask you to tell us about yourself. And of course, we would not be complete without Jean. Jean, please make your way up. I'll be joining you. I think we got 5 chairs there, 5 of us. So just grab yourself a mic and I'll start with Eva. Eva, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the focus, experiences, sacrifices of the residential resolution health support workers that you've worked with? Yep. No, these are not questions. This is just your introduction. Tell us your first and last name, and explain your thoughts on the panel's focus.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Wilson Fontaine. My spirit name is Woman That Stands in the Four Directions, and I'm born and raised from Peguis First Nation. I am the daughter of a survivor. I'm an Indian Day School survivor, intergenerational survivor. I'm honored to be asked to be a part of this panel to share with you some of the impacts and effects that we experienced during the pandemic and even from the inception of the Indian Residential School Resolution Health Support Program. So I'm really honored to sit with these ladies here as well, who are from across Canada, who do the work that we have been doing in supporting survivors and families and communities as they go through the various settlements that have already come forward. And so I've been actually doing this work since 2003 during the ADR and up to current. So it just shocked me yesterday to think that it's been 20 years that I've been doing this work. And but what an honor it has been to hear the experiences of our survivors and the resiliency that they hold, and how they are our heroes, that we still are able to be here and walk that journey with them so that our future children see that we can, when we heal and we use our voices in this way, that we have a bright future. So hi
Hi.
to survivors.
Elisa P., you are on the air.
Okay, my mic is on. Nakomig inyo hatiapika ulat siya waktu hoyan namita ulat tupakata. Thank you. It's an honor to be amongst brothers and sisters here. I'm from Nunavut. I was born in Nunavut. I live in Iqaluit, which is now the capital of Nunavut. I wasn't born there, but my father was kind of conned into staying there because he had skills that the federal government needed in that place at that time. So we were meant to go back to our home camp, but we never made it back, and we just stayed in Iqaluit. So I still live there. I've lived in other places now, but I coordinate programs at Tukwisigiarvik Society in Iqaluit. It started from looking at homelessness and near homelessness in Iqaluit, and it has grown in the past over 20 years now that we started out as a community consultation, looking at the needs in the community. So it grew from the wishes of the community. So I've been there since it was an idea, and I've seen it grown. We have all Inuit staff. The only person that does our administrative stuff is a Hadluna, a non-Inuk, who does our administration and follows our dreams. So believes in us. So we bring the ideas, and Tukwisigiarvik actually is working from the grassroots level. So it has been really successful, and we are happy to be there because we are getting all sorts of people coming into Iqaluit from all regions, from all across Canada too even. And we're open to the community, and I'll elaborate a little bit more about Tukwisigiarvik and the work that we did during the pandemic as we go in the process. In the video last night, if you saw the children with their teeth getting checked, and the first one with the wide open mouth, that's me.
Oh.
When we attended the day schools there, and my late brother, and also a friend who just passed away 2 weeks ago,
Sorry.
was my childhood friend, and we buried her just before we came down. And so she was a lifelong friend, and we've lost many people that way due to sickness, due to unfortunate situations too. So we are there for the community, and I'm so, I appreciate the sources, the resources that are there too for us too when we need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go on, how's the sound back there? Can you hear way in the back? Good? Excellent. Viola.
I stand out of respect for the matriarchs that are here with us, that bless us with your presence and your dignity and your power. I stand with you as a survivor, third generation. My grandparents went to the institution of genocide. My mother went to the institution of genocide. And myself and 7 other siblings in my family went to the same institution of genocide. And so when I think about it, I think about how many years in my own immediate kinship, relatives, over 100 years, lived experience of attempted genocide, of myself as a Secwepemc woman, joining you today from the unceded territory of the Kamloops, the Secwepemc in British Columbia. And I am also a advocate. I work with YWCA Vancouver, and one of my missions, one of my goals, is to uncover the truth in the role that YWCA has played in the abduction of children from our nations across Canada, the role that they played in the abduction of our children put into the Indian hospitals that they were called at the time. I work as an advocate for our people, and I want to honor all of the leaders here today that have joined us to witness this truth, to share and to bear the burden to force change, transformative change that honors the dignity and the rights of our people. My traditional name is Animki Wadum, and I am one of 16 in my family. So I'm truly blessed that all of my siblings are still with me today. And I'm truly blessed to be able to share reflections with you today on the strength and the beauty of our people, of how we showed the world how to treat our people with dignity during the epidemic. Kukshum, all my relations.
You know, it's not very often I get nervous. I just barrel through what I need to do. But these ladies have just eased my mind, my heart, my soul so much. Before I go any further, we have one more panelist to introduce, and I'm going to ask her to do that. Jean, can you share some words?
Good morning. My name is Jean Erasmus, and I make Yellowknife my home. And I'm originally from Fort Chipewyan in northeastern Alberta, and my mother is Alice Toronjo, and my father was Roderick Simpson. They were both residential school students, and my grandmother, Marie Martin, and William Martin, and Isidore Simpson, and Corinne Simpson. There's 3 generations of survivors, myself and all of my 9 siblings went to residential school. So there was a residential school in our community, and it stayed open for 100 years. So you can imagine the impacts in that community where generation after generation spent time in those buildings. And I need to honor them. I need to honor my parents and my grandparents and the ones before them. And I am here as a survivor. I'm not working today. I'm a trauma therapist in the Northwest Territories, and I partner with my husband, Roy. I see a lot of women here, but I really want to honor the men that are here because we see all the women working so hard in our communities to heal themselves, and look at, but it's the men also that need to heal. And I really want to, honor the men that are here, because we need, if we have healthier men, we'll have, healthier families as well. So I really honor my husband, Roy, who is here working. We're both therapists as well, and we work with residential school survivors. And yeah, it's such an honor. I'm thankful for the Northern Region of Indigenous Services Canada for bringing us here. Marie Martin is in the back, and Hazel Buffalo Robe as well. So thank you for bringing us here. This is not as easy as I thought it would be. But, I'm amongst strong women. I'm amongst strong people. And I'm so proud to be here, as a therapist working in trauma, and myself working on myself. I think that that's important, that if we are healthier, then we can help more people. So, yeah.
Tapwe. This is your panels for this morning. This panel is supposed to run till 10:15? 10:15. So, quick check of my trusty little watch. 10:30, we'll go to 10:30. So, we're going to steal your coffee. So we have a series of questions for these ladies that look at the impacts, we look at the sacrifices, the resiliency of the Resolution Health support workers. You've amazing bunch. So we're going to dive right into these questions, ladies. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Oh, bingo. How did the pandemic affect the delivery of in-person services to Indigenous communities in your region? Viola.
Cookshem, Canada enacted federal legislation called Canada's Health Act. And within that statutory legislation, it states in that legislation that everybody in our country, our land, our Indigenous territories, has the right to access health services that is universal to everybody in this country, every human being in this country, regardless of where you live. And it also says in that law, in that legislation, that it's universal. And it also says that everybody should be treated equally. And it says in that law that we have a right to the portability to access health services. And yet, we know from firsthand experience, whether you come from the Inuit community or First Nation or Métis, that law has not been applied for our people during the crisis. But you know what I discovered during that crisis was the incredible beauty and dignity and kindness of our people In our language, we call the white people Shema people. And one of the things that I bore witness to was how they treated their grandmothers, their grandfathers, their elders. You know, during that epidemic, you know, they were sent into these homes to suffer alone. And that compounded the violence through our people during the crisis. But for our people, we didn't do that. It showed me the beauty and the strength and the kindness of our people. One of the grandmothers, Margaret Simon from Wikumakan, Manitoulin Island, you know, she once shared her story, her and her partner, Max Simon. They said, you know, I'm so grateful that my children love me. I feel bad for those people that were sent away to those institutions to suffer in their own loneliness and silence. So I'm grateful that our people carry the values that honor the life. The honor of one is the honor of all. The pain of one is the pain of all. So I believe through our people, we can show the world, we can recover and show the world how we can create a more humane place for everybody. Kushim, all my relations.
Beautiful. Thank you. The honor of one, the honor of all. Ladies, I'll throw that question to you as well. You have, if you'd like to make a comment. Again, how did the pandemic affect the delivery of in-person services to Indigenous communities in your region? If you'd like to add to Viola's comments.
Yeah, Nakalmik, thank you. One of the very big challenges that we have in the Inuit home communities is the lack of, I guess, resources and also lack of counselors, because who we hire, we can't compete with the others. And therefore, we've lost quite a bit of good people that started work with us, but would be going to another job because they pay more. And one of the challenges that we have too is we don't get the information that we need as clearly or as quickly as some other places. And for us, that was a real challenge, even when the Aboriginal Healing Foundation started. We were very late in getting our funding and starting our programs. And there was a day that we almost closed because when Aboriginal Healing Foundation was no longer supporting, we didn't really know where to go to tie us into the next funding, wherever it was going to come from. So sometimes we are faced, are we going to stay open? Or are we going to close? So sometimes we have these challenges, and we have a lot of really good people in our communities, but those really good people get taken to other higher paying jobs, unfortunately. And during the pandemic, I think the communities in Nunavut all came together. What was amazing was that there was territorial-wide phone-in shows with the Chief Administrative Officer, Dr. Michael Patterson, with an interpreter, explaining the next steps or how many communities are now affected, or what is COVID. COVID was something that we had never heard of, and we had to get used to the face masks, the hand washing, and being isolated from your community, from your families. Not being able to see your grandchildren on their birthdays, not being able to visit So, you know, these were hard on some people. And I always remember one elder saying, let's make room for our children and grandchildren here in this house. So, you know, we can be with them. And I think that was the time that, you know, there was a lot of loneliness. And we could not easily go into homes and give comfort. We were there still available. We never closed. The center never closed during pandemic because we were deemed as, what do they, how about? Essential service by the chief medical officer. So we stayed open. We never closed. We just had to make adjustments.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elisa P. Elisa P. Beautiful. Say that name with me, Elisa P. So funding and a brand new worldwide pandemic were two of the significant challenges that you had to deal with. What were other challenges faced by the Resolution health support workers in maintaining continuity of care during the pandemic? And we'll go to you, Elisa P., if you can carry on.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned, Tuquisiquiapic never closed, and we had to make adjustments. And because being an essential service provider, we provide healthy meals, lunch, and breakfast to the homeless or near homeless. And we get 40 people, and just last week we got close to, there was over 60 people in one morning. So we are dealing with a lot of people when we are doing our work. And the adjustments that we had to make was to ensure that the people that were coming in were hand washing, were self-distancing, and wearing the face masks and those. And we had to plan, and we are, as an essential service, we had to plan and still continue to deliver services. So our counselors were available. We have male, elder, Inuit counselors, and Nash is one of them. And he's been here with us for over 20 years, who provides counseling and help to a lot of men that come through the justice system. And we continue these services over the phone. In person was a little bit more difficult to do the counseling and stuff, but we never closed. And as I said, the programs were still very effective. The programs that we carry are very effective programs. And when we are addressing the needs in the communities, it's so important that they come from the grassroots people. Because you know what the grassroots people want and need, and you hear them. You hear them in person, you hear them on the radio. So it's, you know, it becomes a very close-knit community when we get the proper information and the help that we need. So information and the sharing is so very important for us in the communities. And I think, you know, it was a learning process for us. And up to today, we are still quite cautious of how we sanitize the place. Yes. We sanitize the building, that we keep it clean. And as I said, you know, we had to adapt to new ways of understanding things. How the COVID could affect a person's health, and how, you know, some people had to be medevaced because we're so far. They had to be sent south if there was more crisis, that more, I guess, more difficult situations that they needed help in medical-wise.
Yes, maybe Eva, you can take over from there and share a little bit about how your program, how did your program adapt to the restrictions and all these restrictions that
Yeah.
Elisa P. was talking about. How did your program adapt to these things?
You know, we were really fortunate to have been set up where we could actually work from home. And so how we, the biggest challenge was though when, because we were delivering cultural programming to survivors on the land, we couldn't do that anymore. And so with my staff, you know, our team, we were able to adapt in the way that we took it to online. And we have what we call our programming, Reclaiming Culture Connections, Reigniting Blood Memory. And we were doing that on the land, and so we had to take it to online, Zoom. And so, and when you would pass protocol, we had to do it differently. And we were so grateful to those knowledge keepers that they were, you know, they would say, well, go and put tobacco down on the land. Or we would mail it to them. And some of them that were here in Manitoba, we could go and deliver it to them so that they could give those teachings, and we could continue to do an outreach of support within survivors within their homes. And what we learned on that is that our reach was broader than Manitoba within the boundaries of the province, but it reached far into the States and as far as Australia. And so we have survivors all over the world living elsewhere that we're able to connect and still receive those teachings of comfort that our survivors say when we connect with our culture, it heals us. And so that's how we were able to do it that way. But we also were able to, we did sacred fires. Because when the children's graves were discovered, it was difficult. It was, you know, these children were talking from their graves, and people were being triggered. And we had to figure out a way, how can we support people during that time too? And so we did what we called sacred fires. And we kind of did it like a drive-through, because it was really important for us to keep our resolution health support workers and our cultural support workers healthy and safe too, as well as the survivors that we were providing service to. And so we would set up this large tent, and we would have all the information there and for them of resources that were available, because we were in Winnipeg here and across Manitoba. And they came through and they picked up information, and we had different medicines, traditional medicines. And then they were able to offer their tobacco tie, their prayer to a sacred fire, and then be able to be fanned down as well. So that heaviness that they were carrying, that they no longer needed to carry that. And so we had thousands of people come through those sacred fire sites. And so we were so thankful that we were able to do those types of things here in Winnipeg, and we continue to do that. But there was also, you know, our northern communities who didn't have access to their communities, where they had to go to the borders of the reserves, and the most difficult time was when, you know, the Indian Day School applications, the deadlines were coming, and you trying to assist survivors through that settlement agreement was, you know, getting them their applications and then having them, you know, fill it out pretty much on their own, and then pick them up and witness them. And there was a lot of challenges in that way, because we couldn't, they couldn't go in and assist in that way. So it was different from the south to the northern, as you're hearing here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so it was a challenge in that way.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Those are just some of the challenges that these individuals have had to work with, you've had to deal with, and it's being acknowledged here. Thank you, ladies. We're going to go on to the sacrifices sacrifices that our people have made. Viola, how did your lived experience as a survivor influence your work during the pandemic?
You know,
Take
we
a
were
couple
sharing
minutes.
a little bit earlier on about the honor of one is the honor of all, and the pain of one is the pain of all. And because of that lived experience, firsthand experience of being treated inhumanely in these institutions, you could use that lived experience as a survivor to share that great empathy in our hearts and relate that to what was happening at the time for our people. And it was a gift in a way. It's a gift to be able to carry that lived experience and transform it into something good, to make it better, to alleviate that pain of co-survivors in our communities, in our families, and in our nations. And that's what makes that lived experience unique. As much as the pain that was there, at the same time, it gives you that insight to be able to pay extra special attention to other co-survivors that were suffering.
Thank you.
Kirkshem, all my relations.
Thank you, Viola. Jean, you had a follow-up to that?
So in the NWT, our borders were closed. So, and we have small communities, 200 to 300 people in each community. The larger centers had more, but I guess as a survivor myself, that I know that as a survivor, I always look for safety, for if I'm being controlled, you know, so that those sorts of situations that come up, that I wanted to ensure that the clients and the people that we were serving, we wanted to make sure that they were safe, and how to adapt, like you were talking about, you know, adapting to the new restrictions, the control piece. So, you know, that those restrictions were in place to protect us. And it created a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of suspicion, you know, and, you know, the mandatory masks and the mandatory vaccinations and all of that. So as a survivor, I was like, okay, how do I maintain this safety with myself, my family, and with the people that we're working with? So yeah, it was really important to do that.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Elizabeth, and I'm going to ask you about sacrifices.
I think as Indigenous people, we know that we share. We share our food, we share our knowledge, we share the catches from the land, the harvest from the land. And these were things that a lot of the people were starting, you know, were worried about, were, you know, uncertain about. But when we heard that there was funding now available to relieve some of these things that we were being faced with, we applied for funding, and we got funding to do food hampers for about 156 or 150 over elders in the community, and we put a package together, about $250 worth of essentials, some cleaning supplies, and some disinfectant products. And we distributed those to the elders with our existing staff and hiring a couple of young people, but following the restrictions we still had in the community. So this really relieved, I think, a lot of the loneliness that the elders felt, that the communities felt, because you could not just easily go to the stores anymore during the restriction in our community. So there was that relief of things that they really appreciated. And there were tears when food hampers were being delivered because of thankfulness. We were able to converse with them, not for a long time, but at least, they had somebody that to see instead of just being alone in the house, because that we have a lot of lonely elders. Elders do become really lonely, and they get, it's like longing to see somebody, longing for visitors. And so we distributed quite a bit in the communities, starting from May 2020 to July 2022. We distributed a lot, and we got a lot of funding from the 3 levels of government and from other sources in the community. And also, we were also able to visit some of the homes to go clean up for them, to sanitize their place, to share some tea and bannock with them, to converse with them, but still following the restrictions that were posed upon us during this time.
I keep wanting to say residential. The resolution health support workers. We're a busy group of people, and your work is not finished by any stretch of the imagination. But for the other panelists, I was wondering if you could share as well what sacrifices did the RHSW workers make to ensure that necessary support was provided despite the risks and challenges posed by COVID, the pandemic?
In the small communities in the NWT, because safety was so important, and a lot of elders were, it's a new thing. It's that transition from doing everything in the community to staying indoors and like the visitation and stuff. So it was a real challenge, and I think it hurt a lot of people. Being isolated, being lonely, not having the things that were normal everyday experiences. So I think that even the anxiety and the depression and the loneliness really impacted our communities. So yeah, those were real painful things for our people to go through.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Elisabeth. Get it. I said that right. Elisabeth.
Yeah, you said it right.
I'm going to go to Eva here and ask her, how did the Resolution Health Support Program address the well-being and specific needs of those workers during the pandemic?
And so how we were able to stay connected during that time, because we began working from our homes and staying connected to survivors in that way, and going to their doorsteps and seeing them in Tim Hortons and wearing the masks and all those safety precautions that we were asked to do. But as a team, we would meet on a daily basis, and we couldn't do that face to face. So we would Zoom together and we would touch base. And because we were still delivering the programming through Zoom and such, and helping survivors with Indian Day School and just staying connected to them, doing wellness checks through telephone, through window visits, through door visits. But it was important for us to stay as a team connected. And so we were able to use technology in that way. And every Monday morning, we would touch base with one another and kind of go through our week and see how everybody was doing. And if there was something that was needed or it needed to be teamwork to be done, that's how we stayed connected. Because, you know, going into, there was ceremony happening, but of course, you know, it was very specific to individuals, and you couldn't bring large numbers of people into ceremonies. So it was a tricky thing to do during a very difficult time where people's health needed to be considered, and of course their safety.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eva. We're going to move on to the last section here regarding impact on our communities. And I'm going to go to Jean. Jean, what was your experience with restrictions during the pandemic and their impact on the mental health and overall well-being of Indigenous communities in your region?
Well, I'll give you an example of one of the things that happened to me personally was going to visit my uncle who was in a long-term care in Fort Smith, and going up to the facility and them saying there was 5 of my family members were there to visit, and they wouldn't allow us in the facility, only one at a time. And we had to choose which one was going to go inside. And so, you know, the anger, of course, came up, and we were walked to my uncle's window, and, you know, just seeing the tears of this 80-year-old man staring back and saying he couldn't, I wish I could come out there and hug you. So that was, you know, those were the things. So the grief, you know, we look at ceremony as being such an important part of our culture, and part of the thing, one of the things that I remember was when, say for example, people were in the hospital and somebody was dying, and they were only allowing 2 people into the room, whereas before, you know, the family would all show up and support one another, and that wasn't no longer there. So it took away from the grief process. You know, it took away from the ceremony. You know, washing the body was no longer, you know, permitted. You know, these colonial restrictions on something as such important rites of passage. So, you know, those cultural things were really impacted. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jean, beautiful. We have a couple more questions, and we had hoped that we'd have time for you, the audience, participants, to throw questions up here, but we've got 10 minutes left in our time together as a panel. And the 2 questions I want to throw out, again, one is for Elisapie and the other would be open to the panel. But what are some of the unique challenges faced by these communities during the pandemic, by your community during the pandemic, and how did your program address them? Sound. We need sound.
Sound. Daima. One of the real hard things that we also went through in the communities was if a family member or a friend passed, that we could not attend their funerals. There were restrictions. There was sometimes like told not to be there, or maybe 1 or 2 people or up to 5 family members can be there, or there was none in some cases. And that was something that was really, really hard on some families. And there was some anger there was even some divisions, I think, of, why can't we go there? There was, like I said, anger and that too as well. And I think as the programs that we run at Tuquisigalvic and being faced with something that was so new to us, something that was foreign to us, I think made us more resilient and made us stronger to be able to look for ways of helping others. How can we connect? How do we connect? And we had bi-weekly bi-weekly telephone conferences with the first line workers, with service providers, and just sharing what it is that we're doing. And the city was very good in keeping us informed of the new information that might be coming out from the chief medical officer, and also being able to share of what it is that is becoming more lenient, that we can now do this and provide more help. But we were always available through phone call and through the deliveries and through the elder home visits when we did the sanitizing of their homes and stuff. That helped to relieve a lot of the hardships that people were facing and not being able to express otherwise.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I wanted to ask Viola to speak to this question, and maybe Eva, you might want to throw some comments at us as well. What changes or lessons have been learned from the pandemic that can help improve the delivery of future support service?
I really want to echo the words of my new friends here on this panel on the power of our people, on the power of ceremony, on the power of culture, on the power of the right to be who we are, on the power of addressing and challenging and creating a paradigm shift in the Health Act legislation that lifts up our right to the way we want to offer health supports, that lifts up our dignity and diversity as First Nations, Inuit, Métis people in the way we offer support, because we know we've survived the attempted genocide over 1,000 years since settlers come here. And so we have living proof with us in this room today. We have healers. And through our diversity of wellness approaches in our culture, it honors all facets of who we are as a human being. And we need to be able to hold the colonial governments, the provincial governments, territorial governments, to account on how they prioritize the funding for our people for the right to health, to goodness. Because right now, there is no accountability on the government's part. They treat us as throwaways. We're the last priority on the list in the budgets. And yet, we have, and it's been said time and time again, research has shown the pathology of our pain. So we need to change that shift, a tidal wave paradigm shift on Health Act amendments that embraces our rights as Indigenous peoples to lift up our ways of being and to force the colonial governments to not make money off our pain. We have to challenge that way of thinking, which is a colonial mindset. Our health isn't about money. We're not about making doctors rich. We're about wanting wellness for our children and our grandchildren and so on. Cooksham, all my relations.
I just want to add to that and maybe give some information. Since the inception of the Indian Residential School Resolution House Support Program, between 2011 and 2018, there was 900,000 survivors and families that accessed cultural and emotional support services. And so that equaled out to 5.8 million times that our people have accessed this program. Also, there was 65,000 IRS survivors and families that accessed counseling. And then after the TRC, they thought that the demand would lessen, but in fact, it increased. And the impacts from COVID and the recovery of the missing children and the unmarked graves, the need became greater. And of course, the Indian Day School, the need became greater for supports on this program. And survivors have said, and this is a statement from a survivor, that this program, they have helped me to make change in my family, to break cycles so that my children have a chance at a future. And what Viola says is that, you know, the lack of funding, sustainable, permanent funding from a commitment from our colonial governments needs to be permanent, because a CBC article that just came out on August 25th, they are actually looking at funding cuts. And so right now within our funding contribution agreements, there needs to be flexibility. There needs to be where we need to be allowed to heal in the way that our survivors are saying they need healing, and not to be in an institution, but we're from an arm's length. It feels like that still, that there are so many restrictions on how we utilize this funding and how we help support our survivors and their families. And so it needs to be adequate. It needs to be stable, permanent, and sustainable. And I just wanted to share some of my notes here. And so, you know, and by doing so, we kind of live on a fiscal basis, and it causes undue stress on the frontline workers, because you never know if you're going to be there the next year. And of course, continuum care for survivors is so important. That aftercare is so critically important, that when you have people not feeling safe in their jobs and they go find and look for more secure jobs, that continuum care where trust has been built is no longer there. And so they have to rebuild that, because we're bringing in new staff. And so it's so important for that. And so now with the unmarked graves and supporting those ground searches, we are there at every single one. We are asked to be there at every single one. And so so to be culture, you know, it's essential that we continue to provide the culturally grounded services, but also the trauma-informed services that this unique group of workforce under the Indian Residential School Resolution Health Support Program, our Resolution Health workers, our cultural support workers, we're a unique group. And we have been doing this for a very long time. And so with the funding cuts that were announced recently, that you know, every minister is looking at savings. So in every department, and this includes the Indian Residential School programming. So it's not consistent with the spirit of reconciliation. And the government, you know, they look at sunsetting initiatives. They look at this as an initiative. It's not an initiative. This is healing. This is people's lives. This is our future. And so we need to call on government to provide that sustainable funding, and that it's a systemic discrimination.
Hi. Kinanaskamit na. Nanaskom tugok. Our time is run out on us. Actually, I would like to thank the gentleman that came up and spoke about the Bentwood box here, and this very sacred box. I kept tripping over my words, my thoughts, and I think it's, we have 1,000 years of history right here, 1,000 years of our ancestors with us here today. And that's a lot to keep in my mind. But we've had to endure funding cuts. We've had to endure restrictions of all kind, from isolation to not being able to go to a loved one's funeral. We couldn't visit one another. We had to get these needles and all different kinds, not just once or twice or 3 times, some 4 or even 5 times. But yet you're still here. What do we say? We say, doesn't matter what you throw at us, we're going to be here. Our people have been through so much, and these ladies, our panelists, Jean, Viola, Elizabeth, and Eva, have spoken about the resilience to meet the challenges, to face and overcome the impacts that our people have endured and will continue to endure. We have no choice because we are Indigenous people. We are Inuit. We are all nations of the original people of this land. Can you please help me to thank our panelists for their wise words. Hi, ladies. Naskumtagok. They want to take the mic home.
Dang, he's tall. Yeah, right there. Awesome. Awesome job, hey? Let's give Ed Asier and the panelists a big round of applause for sharing the best of what they can today. And, jeez, whoa. Take it easy. Take it easy, bro.
I know.
Take it easy, bro. No worries. And as the panelists make their way down, let's give them all a big round of applause. This is our last day, and I'm feeling pretty emotional. But like when we started gathering like 20 years ago, this room would have been full of tears still. And we're still crying, but we're crying in happier ways now. And so I want you to know that I'm so extremely proud of each of you for hanging in there and sharing those important testimonies. Chimigwech.
Announce the VIP where they're gonna announce the VIP where they can take their luggage and rest for the rest of the days for those who are going late on flights.
Are you guys ready for the last speaker of the day? Her name is Miss Connie War. Oh, before I start that though, if anyone has a flight and you need to keep your bag somewhere, I believe you can bring them down here. The VIP on the second floor. So if you have main level. So if you have any luggage that you want stored and your flight's later on in the day, you can leave it on the main level with the registration folks. All right? Okay. Yeah, and you can hang out in the room. Yeah, to have a nap, whatever. Visit. I'd like to introduce you to one of my colleagues, friends, journalism sisters, Connie Walker. She just won a Pulitzer Prize and a Peabody Award winning she's an investigative journalist and the host of the acclaimed podcast Stolen from Spotify Studios. Her work has exposed the crisis of violence in Indigenous communities and the devastating impacts of intergenerational trauma stemming from Indian residential schools in Canada and the US. Connie Walker discusses her award-winning podcast, Stolen. So ladies and gentlemen, this young lady has done so much work in dispelling a lot of the stereotypes and the myths that are out there about us. And the work that she's done with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is so profound, it's imperative. And she's being recognized internationally for her work and her words that she brings together in this amazing podcast. So please join me. Put your hands together as Miss Connie Walker makes her way onto the stage. Oh, there you go.
Hi, how are you? So good to see you. Thank you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to the NCTR for the invitation to join you all here today. It truly is an honor to be here, and I'm so glad to see survivors being supported to come together, to share knowledge, and celebrate resilience. I was reflecting on the theme of the conference, breaking the colonial mindset, and what that means in my role as a journalist. I've been a journalist for over 20 years, and for the last several years, I've been primarily working in podcasting, which is audio storytelling. I found that audio storytelling is really the perfect platform to talk about stories from our communities, because we have the time and space to find the truth. I hosted the investigative podcast with CBC called Missing and Murdered, and then for the last few years, I have been working on a podcast called Stolen with Gimlet Media. And we need to go to the next slide. We're on slide 2. Our podcasts focus on a single case over 8 episodes, a deep dive investigation into the life of an Indigenous person, Alberta Williams, Cleo Samagonis, Jermaine Charlo. And we don't only focus on the violence that resulted in their death or disappearance, but we also explore the bigger context to try to help people understand the realities that Indigenous people live in Canada and the United States. Our podcasts have been downloaded millions of times by people around the world. We've won major journalism awards in Canada and the United States and have been featured in the Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, the New York Times, and Vogue. I'm so grateful to be able to do this work. Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful because it feels like I'm finally in a place where I can contribute to the work you're all doing at breaking the colonial mindset, by telling true stories about our lives as Indigenous people and by telling the truth about our history. And I believe that my life and my experience as an Indigenous woman gives me the tools to help people understand. Before coming here today, I thought about when I first thought about becoming a journalist. I grew up in Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. I was raised on the File Hills community, Okanagan Reservation. Like many kids from the reserve, I went to school in a nearby small town. Next slide. And I remember I was in grade 12 when I first learned about Pamela George. Pamela George was a 28-year-old Saulteaux mother of 2. She was a daughter, a sister, and she was from the Sakamay First Nation, which is not far from where I grew up. Pamela lived in Regina with her young children. She was killed in 1995. She was beaten and left on a rural road outside of Regina one night in April. The 2 men who were charged in Pamela's death didn't go on trial until late the next year. Now, I wasn't a teenager who paid much attention to the news, but I knew about Pamela because it was a high-profile trial that dominated the headlines in Saskatchewan and across Canada. And as a young First Nations woman, I was keenly aware of the way that Pamela was spoken about in the media and how it differed from the 2 white men who were charged in her death. I'm going to play a clip from a story on The National from December 19th, 1996, just to show you what I'm talking about. So I think they're having trouble.
In Regina, a jury is deciding the fate of 2 young men charged with the murder of a young woman. It's a case a lot of people are watching closely, and the CBC's Eric Sorensen tells us why.
The accused are young and clean-cut. Steve Comerfield, a basketball star. Alex Ternowetsky, a hockey standout. They come from middle-class families. The victim was Aboriginal and a prostitute. The 2 men admit they were cruising Regina's streets one night last year looking for a hooker. In this area known for prostitutes, they admitted picking up Pamela George, taking her to a remote roadside, beating her, and leaving her behind. Her body was found the next morning by police. In court, a friend of the accused testified that Comerfield told him, "We drove around, got drunk, and killed this chick." And that Ternowetsky told him she deserved it. She was Indian. The accused denied making those comments. They also testified they didn't hit Pamela George that hard.
It wasn't just the CBC. Newspaper headlines called Pamela, quote, a prostitute, but didn't say much else about her life. I felt like I knew more about the 2 men who were charged with her murder than I did about Pamela. And it was my first lesson at the harm that can come when somebody else is telling our stories for us. Stephen Comerfield, the basketball star, and Alex Ternowetsky, the hockey standout, were acquitted of first-degree murder and sentenced to manslaughter in Pamela's death. And at the time, I remember wondering if there were any First Nations journalists in the newsrooms that were covering the trial. And it was the first time I thought about becoming a journalist. I wrote something for our high school newsletter. I wanted to help people better understand not just Pamela, but all First Nations, to learn about our people and our communities, to create space so that people could have empathy for Pamela, a young single mother who struggled to raise a family. Ternowetsky and Comerfield both served around 4 years of jail time and were released on bail around the time that I started my career as a journalist. I was excited about the impact that I could have and my future in journalism, but I quickly realized that having just one voice in a newsroom might not be enough. Back then, it seemed like the only time our stories made the news at all was when there was a crisis or a conflict. I remember in 2005, I was working on a national news program based in Toronto when a young woman who I knew from back home went missing. This was before social media, before Facebook, and her family had sent out an email chain with her photo, asking people to forward it. Her name was Amber Redman, and I knew her because I coached her in volleyball at the Saskatchewan Indian Winter Games when I was in university. Amber and my sister were the same age. That same summer, another young woman went missing in Toronto, and her name was Alicia Ross. Amber and Alicia went missing within 1 month of each other in the summer of 2005. And I remember thinking there were so many similarities between them. Both these young, beautiful women who had bright futures ahead of them. Both had families who were desperate for any information about their disappearance. But there were key differences. Alicia was white and blonde, and her disappearance was covered by the national newspapers and national newscasts. And Amber's disappearance barely even got any local coverage. I remember I went in to pitch a story to my boss. I wanted to compare and contrast these 2 cases and the attention they were getting in the media. And at the time, I worked for a program whose mandate was to examine the role of media. I thought my story would be a perfect fit for our show. So I went into her office, but before I could really begin, she held up her hand and stopped me and said, "This isn't another poor Indian story, is it?" I was the only Indigenous person in my newsroom, and I didn't feel like there was anywhere to turn to for support. So I held my tongue. And I held my tongue for years, Looking back, I'm horrified by the attitudes that Indigenous journalists faced back then, the microaggressions, the straight up racism that led to this false belief that our stories and our voices were not important, that Canadians didn't care, that our history, our truths, and that we didn't matter. Thankfully, that is changing. I can point to so many moments over the last several years that have helped turn the tide, helped shift the conversation. And so much of it started with you, survivors, and the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In 2015, I covered the final event of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Ottawa. The TRC coverage led the national for 5 days in a row, and on the day that the final report was released, the first 15 minutes of the entire show was all TRC coverage. At the final event, I remember Chief Commissioner Justice Murray Sinclair telling a room packed full of survivors, intergenerational survivors, and media that there's not a single Indigenous person in Canada whose life has not been touched by the legacy of residential schools. I knew that was true when I heard it, but it wasn't until many, many years later that I began to understand fully what that meant. That was in May of 2021, when, as one elder told me, a terrible discovery woke up the world. The remains of children found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School wasn't a shock or surprise to people who were paying attention, but the truth is so many people weren't paying attention. But finally, after the discovery in Kamloops, it seemed like, at least for a little while, people were finally starting to pay attention, to open their minds, to begin to understand what survivors had been saying for years and decades. I don't have to tell you all what a sensitive time that was, especially for survivors. I remember seeing my family members making posts on social media about their childhoods in these schools. People who had never speak about it finally felt safe enough to come forward and start sharing their stories publicly. About 2 weeks after the discovery in Kamloops, I was scrolling through Facebook one evening, and I read a post that stopped me in my tracks. It was written by my late brother, Hal Cameron, and it was about it was written by my brother, Hal Cameron, and it was about my late father, Howard Cameron. Hal said that our dad once told him a story about when he was an RCMP officer in rural Saskatchewan in the 1970s. One night, my dad was out on patrol, and he saw a vehicle that was swerving on the road, and he thought the driver might be impaired, so he pulled it over. And when he got to the window, he realized that he recognized the driver. It was a priest who had abused him at residential school. Hal said that our dad beat up the priest that night on the side of the road. He thought for sure there would be a call to his commanding officer, that would be the end of his career, but nothing happened. And it just became a story that my dad shared with my brother. My brother Hal told me that he felt pride when he thought of that story, proud that our dad was able to exact some sort of justice for what he went through in residential school. But when I read that post, I felt ill. I read it again and again. I'd never heard this story about my dad. I knew that he had gone to a residential school, but that was it. I didn't know where he went or for how long, and I never knew that he had been abused by a priest. Given what I knew about residential schools from my reporting, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised at that revelation, but I was. It was shocking. It broke my heart and it made me angry. Because I didn't think about my dad, the police officer on the side of the road. I thought about the little boy that he was at residential school. And I couldn't stop thinking of him. I tried. In the days and weeks following, I tried my best to put it out of my mind, to push it away, but it just kept coming back. I realized I had so many questions about my dad. How did what happened to him at that school affect the father that he was to me? I wasn't that close to my dad. My parents split up when I was 7 years old, and I think I was mostly relieved. The dad I remember was angry and violent. And the memories I have from him kept me at a distance from him my whole life. But hearing this one story made me want to get closer, to understand him better. In the last few years, I've been learning a lot about the impacts of trauma and PTSD, and about healing from trauma. And I've learned that you can't outrun it, and that one way to heal from it is to face it head on, to expose it and shine a spotlight on it. And so that's what I decided to do, investigate my dad's story. Because even though I've spent years reporting on the intergenerational effects of residential schools, I'd never really connected the dots in my own life and in my own family. I'm going to play a clip from our podcast, which is my investigation into my dad's experience at the St. Michael's Indian Residential School. This story brought me home to a mystery in my own family that I need to solve.
Did he tell you who the priest was or anything about him?
No, he didn't know.
I've never heard him mention names, but I knew he had stories.
I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say it on this thing.
My search for answers has led me to the St. Michael's Indian Residential School.
That first day I stepped into that residential school, my childhood was gone.
The truth about St. Michael's has been kept hidden, sealed by courts and buried in archives. Investigating what happened to my dad at that school has exposed a much darker secret.
What is this? Looks like there are photos of boys undressing.
Somebody could come and get me. Father wants you.
They were hit so hard. Oh my goodness, I can remember the scream.
He's the one that said he was sexually abused by a priest.
Did he say which priest?
They got away with it. They got away with it. But then it's not over.
You mean they could still be charged?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I think he's still alive. I want to go see him.
Father, are you telling the truth about your own experiences?
Huh?
Are you telling the truth about your experiences with children? Stolen: Surviving St. Michael's premieres May 17th. Follow and listen for free, only on Spotify.
If those were workers of God, I hate to see what the devil would do.
My father passed away in 2013, so I couldn't ask him directly about his experience. But he was one of 15 siblings in his family who was sent to the St. Michael's Indian Residential School. His brothers and sisters were there with him. They could help me understand what life was like at St. Michael's for my dad. But I wondered, would my aunts and uncles want to talk about their experiences? Because this is not something that we spoke about in our families. I'd never talked to him about residential school, and I'd never talked to my aunts and uncles, and I realized that we weren't alone in that. So I approached them with care. I wanted to make sure that they would be okay talking about it. And when I asked them, they were all open and willing and ready. What followed were conversations with my aunts and uncles that lasted 2 or 3 hours or more. We talked about their childhoods on the Beardies and Okamasas First Nation. We talked about their time at St. Michael's, and we talked about my dad. Despite the fact that they were sometimes intense, heavy conversations, there was also a lot of laughter. And after each one, I somehow felt lighter. I was so grateful and appreciative for my family for sharing their stories. What a gift they were giving me, helping me get to know my dad and the truth about our family history. And I also started learning from them about St. Michael's. The school was run by a Catholic order of priests called the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. The Oblates handed over their archives to the provincial archives in Alberta, so I also went there. And I found my dad's admission form to St. Michael's. He was sent to St. Michael's when he was 6 years old. I also found the records of both of his parents and both of their parents. Nimishram Leo Cameron attended for 8 years in 1930, and his father, my chap and our great-grandfather, John Baptiste Cameron, was student number 68 in 1900. 4 generations of my family went to this school before it closed in 1997, but nobody had seen these records before. There were photographs from the school of the children, hundreds of children who lived there. There were attendance records, school newsletters, and a booklet of the names and numbers assigned to the children at St. Michael's. I photographed as much as I could in the 2 days I was there and shared some of the images on Facebook for community members to see. And it was just the beginning of learning the truth about St. Michael's. But I knew so much remained hidden. I was looking for the priest who had abused my dad, and I'd heard names of some of the priests at the school from my family. So I asked to see their personnel records, but I was told that the priests' personnel files were sealed until 50 years after their deaths. But I was able to access a personal folder from 2 priests. They were filled with mementos and photos, and in one I saw negatives that contained pictures of boys changing in a locker room. I wondered what else was being hidden that I wasn't able to see. It made me want to learn more about St. Michael's and understand what my dad and the other children who lived there endured. So we decided to broaden the scope of our investigation and try to talk to other survivors from St. Michael's. One of the first interviews I did outside of my family was with Eugene Arcan, a survivor who's done a lot of work with the TRC. Eugene knew my dad from the time they were boys. In my interview with Eugene, he helped me understand the person my father was when he left the school, the person he was when I was a child. He helped me connect the dots and understand why my dad struggled in the years after he left residential school. I told Eugene that I was trying to find the priest who hurt my dad. I explained why I wanted to know what happened to him and if he had ever been held accountable. And I was surprised when Eugene cautioned me against it. He says I shouldn't focus on finding the priest, that I should focus on my own family and my own healing. He told me what an elder had told him when he started working with survivors. He said, "Don't play with this."
I don't mind sharing with you because I know you and I know your dad. And just, when I started on this journey, that same person who helped me, encouraged me to regain my language, I told him, I'm going to start working with residential school survivors. And he said, good, Marga. He said, Moyo magameto agata man. He said, don't play with this. He said to me, there are still people walking around out there not being able to go home. And so I'm very cautious on how I deal with this. The stuff that I've shared with you, that's our knowledge. It's what we've learned. And we use that in a respectful way. This is what I call nehiyamam tenechigan. This is what we have learned. We don't profiteer from it. We take care of it, but we have to pass it down. We use this in a good way. Don't play with this, And I see people playing with it. I see people thinking they're doing good when they're not doing good, especially with the settler community. If it's a child love, like what you're doing, and other children, I have no issue with moving it forward. Just be careful with it. Be careful with it. Don't play with it. Hey?
Eugene's words really shook me that day and resonated with me. It made me think about my life and my work, about what it means to really try to elevate the voices of survivors, about whether or not this was really my story to tell. Eugene told me that stories from survivors come with great responsibility and that I needed to keep them and their experiences and their voices centered in my work. His interview changed the way that we approached the story about my dad. It forced me to examine exactly how this was my story to tell and reflect on the space that we were giving survivors to tell stories for themselves. And I took that to heart. Moving forward, I had another goal in our podcast, to create space for survivors to tell their own stories.
St. Michael's Indian Residential School.
You might want to start that over. I think the clip got.
School loomed over Duck Lake for more than 100 years, until April 28, 2001, when it burned to the ground. I went to the spot where St. Michael's used to stand. Now there's just an empty, grassy patch of land, except for a small row of little shoes where the front steps used to be. A makeshift memorial for the children who died there. But even those who made it home had their childhood stolen by that place. As their children, we felt the impacts of that trauma. But do we really know what they survived? Eugene Arcand says we should let survivors speak for themselves, that this is their story. They should be the ones to tell it. So you're going to hear the voices of survivors from St. Michael's, reconstructing what life was like at the school through their memories, to show us the truth of what really happened inside those walls. They were children then, they are elders now. This is the time to hear their stories.
We interviewed 28 survivors for our podcast. Episode 4 is a piece of oral history, just survivors' voices, talking about their lives and their experiences at St. Michael's. Do you remember your life before residential school? Like, what was it like for you at home?
I remember a very happy life.
I remember living with my mom and my mushroom in Kokum. Never, ever did they lay a hand on me. I used to sleep with my Kokum.
Our mushroom had to get up early in the morning and he'd make fire. And me and my sister Almeida would go running to our Kokum just like she was just a heater, eh? She was so nice and warm. Mm-hmm. We'd go snuggle on either side of her while our mushroom went out.
I was so used to getting up in the morning, running outside, playing with my dog, going down to watch the boats go out in the lake, going to visit my grandparents, and all that was taken away.
Do you remember your first memory of St. Michael's? Like, do you remember what you felt like when you first went there?
Oh yeah, they picked us up here in a truck in Sturgeon Lake. It was kind of a cattle truck, and they loaded us up. My mom was crying. My dad was turning away. He didn't want to look at us being herded in. There was an RCMP officer, a priest, and the Indian agent. And they told my parents they have to go to a Catholic school in St. Michael's, and if you don't send them to school, you will end up in jail. That's what they told our parents. And the priest says, we will look after your children, we will love your children. I will be the father to your children, and we have nuns and sisters in school over there. They will be the mothers of your children.
The survivors that we interviewed attended St. Michael's over decades. They were there at different ages and at different times, but what they described were eerily similar experiences. It was like everyone was watching the same scene unfold, but from a different vantage point, from a different angle. I'm so grateful to each survivor who shared with us those experiences. It's a powerful episode, and one again that taught me the importance of understanding the truth before we can have meaningful conversations about reconciliation. Because in those interviews, survivors shared their experiences, and they also shared the names of people who were abusing children at St. Michael's. What started as an investigation to try to find one priest who hurt my dad became much bigger. We wanted to understand as much of the truth as we could about the school. And we wanted to, excuse me, for the first time, publicly name as many alleged abusers as we could. Thank you. More than 26,000 survivors, as you know, went through the IAP process as part of the residential school settlement. Through the IAP, survivors reported thousands of crimes committed against them as children, but no one was ever charged through the IAP because it wasn't a criminal process. It was designed to offer financial compensation and to keep the findings private. And to this day, IAP records are sealed to protect the privacy of survivors. And as a result, the privacy of alleged abusers has been protected too. We couldn't see the IAP records, but then one of our producers, Chantal Bell-Richard, had an idea. For many survivors, the IAP wasn't the first time they had told their stories, told their truths. Thousands of them had done it years before, when they sued the government and the churches. If we could find those lawsuits, what would be in them? Would they include the names we were looking for? We set out to find the lawsuits of survivors of St. Michael's, and we did. Through access to information requests with the Canadian government, we found 482 lawsuits filed by St. Michael's survivors against the Canadian government and the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. What we found in those lawsuits was horrifying and shocking, devastating. Also devastating were the denials that were issued in the statements of defense by the Canadian government and the priests who ran the school. In those documents, we found more than 219 allegations of sexual abuse against 17 oblate priests, 15 staff members, and 13 nuns at this one school. The majority of those alleged abusers had more than one allegation against them. In many cases, they didn't refer to a single incident either, but abuse that continued over weeks, months, and years. We found that many of those alleged abusers stayed with the church their entire careers. They moved around, they went to different schools and churches and communities. And we also found that there wasn't a single nun or oblate priest that we know who has ever been charged for a crime relating to what happened at St. Michael's. This was only one investigation into one residential school, and I'm still processing what we were able to uncover, and what I'm left with is anger. How can it be only now, in 2022, that this truth is coming to light? The window to document it, the window to understand it, is shrinking. And what this process has also taught me is how important the truth is. We know we're all still living with the effects of residential schools. We, intergenerational survivors, families, and communities need to know the truth. And Canadians need to know and understand the full truth of residential schools before we can have meaningful reconciliation. This started as a personal story for me. One daughter wanting to learn more about her father. And I didn't get all of the answers to all of the questions that I had about my dad, but what I came away with was incredibly valuable. It was a more complete understanding of what he went through and how that shaped his life. After he left residential school, my dad struggled for a lot of years, but he kept going. He eventually reconnected with his culture, reclaimed his language and connection to the spirituality that they tried to take from him. He became an incredible father and grandfather and a cultural leader in our community. I felt like through the podcast, I got to know that part of him that I had missed out on because of residential schools. After we published the podcast, I heard from so many other intergenerational survivors who said that me talking about my dad and the questions that I had for him felt like their own story. I'm so grateful to him. I'm so grateful to know more of the truth about my dad, and I remain in awe of him and all survivors. Your strength Your resilience, your ability to persevere, to take back what was stolen is awe-inspiring. Thank you. I want to thank all of you. These are such, yes. These are such important truths, and I feel like getting to do this work, getting to be supported to try to find the truth, to try to tell our stories, is what I can do in my role as a journalist to help break this colonial mindset. And so I thank you all for supporting me. I have one more slide that is, again, from episode 4, which is interviews with survivors from St. Michael's.
I know what happened.
I think it's not playing. We have to play it.
I know what happened. I lived it. Makes me mad. For all the years, my growing up years that were taken away from me, brutally, when I should have had those memories.
When I think of it, it's sad memories. When I think of it.
Has there been anything that has helped you to heal?
My sweat lodge.
Sometimes we cry for each other. We don't sit there and share tears because we're crying for ourselves. It's for each other. Like, who has been held accountable for the things that they have done to us? Nobody.
Is there any way for justice?
No, the only justice I got out of that was the way I treated my kids. I never hit my kids, never. I hugged and kissed my kids and told them I loved them. You know, and we raised them right. That's the only injustice I got, was the way I loved my kids so much.
I just love that last clip from Frank, because as an intergenerational survivor, I want to say that we felt that love. That, you know, as somebody who was raised by residential school survivors, I'm just so grateful, because every one of them taught me the importance of family and community and loving one another. And I'm so grateful to be here with you all today and to be sharing part of my work and part of my family's story. I really appreciate you listening and also being here to share with me. Thank you. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. It's so nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Your work and your life's work, everything that you've done for our people, it doesn't go unnoticed. So I'd like to call the Arcans to come up, Eugene and Lorna, as well as your 3 sisters.
My sisters, yeah.
And as we're waiting for them, I just want to remind you that Legacy of Hope is set up in the back. Mr. Gordon Spence is back there. So let's give them a round of applause. They have a lot of material back there. And if you could take some home to your home fires and share them with your family and friends, I would appreciate that, because that work that they've done at Legacy is so pivotal and important. And so I wanna thank Gordon for coming up and reminding me of just that alone. I used to work at the Legacy of Hope, retaining survivor testimonies, and so I want to thank Legacy of Hope for that.
Ask for Eugene again.
Eugene? I heard him say, yeah. Oh, there he is. He's coming. He used to be a really, really, like, if you knew Eugene prior to working with the TRC, he is such a sports fanatic. Like, he never wears dress-up shoes. He's always wearing runners. You know what I mean? Like, he's such a sports person. He's been very active in the sports community in Saskatchewan, and he's such a big presence for all of us, hey? Like, he's such a big presence. Let's give him a big round of applause as he makes his way up.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, Asaimina. I want to be honest with my fellow survivors and to Connie and her family again. I couldn't handle it. I had to leave. I look forward to that day when we can all just relax and watch this true history. I'm not there yet. But thanks to Connie and her sisters, who are members of the Saskatoon Survivor Circle, and I see Ida coming up. And you know, I'm going to take a liberty here. There are some Cameron family members out there. I want to ask them to come up here, and Walker family members to come and spend this moment, this space with Connie and her sisters. So please feel free to come up. Don't be shy. Tigine was his name. Those of you that understand Anishinaabe and Cree, Tigine is the nutty one, the crazy one. And in 1961, his brother and I, older brothers, went to school together in 1958. In 1959, Barb came along. In 1960, George came along. And in 1961, I met Tigine, this crazy little 5-year-old, 6-year-old boy that just didn't give a shit about anything or anybody. And he went on like that for about 6 years. And the only person he would listen to was his older brother, Ernie. And it's said today that him and his brother Ernie continued through life having this animosity towards one another. But I see it. It was done by my buddy Ernie because Tigine would listen to no one. He was scared of no one except Ernie. And then he became a cop. He was an incredible ball player. He was an incredible hockey player. Mean he was. And he could do any sport, just like the gifts that I received. And we didn't even know how good we were. And when he got out of there, Howard began the dysfunctional lifestyle that we all had. He had several relationships, mixed family. But before he left, and while Peter's over here talking while I'm trying to concentrate, another schoolmate, before he left, he went to our ways. He was an Uskapeo extraordinaire. And he was an Uskapeo for Team Saskatchewan. When we went to BC, when we came to Manitoba, we went to BC twice. He was our Uskapeo for the guidance team. He was powerful medicine that man carried. And before he left, he always said his most powerful experience was working with the kids from Saskatchewan. And I want to take this one moment for your Kokums and your Mushoms and your parents out there that had your kids go to the North American Indigenous Games after the pandemic this summer in Halifax. I want to encourage you to take a moment to thank your leadership and your community for making sure that not only our kids who went to the Halifax North American Indigenous Games, but the parents, the grandparents who supported those kids towards the promotion of a positive lifestyle. And I think we should all take a moment as old people, residential school survivors, for thanking that same leadership for getting us here, for those that helped out their residential school survivors. When it comes to that, I think our leadership deserve a nice round of applause. We don't get along, for sure we don't, but when we need them, they're there. I want to get to the subject at hand. Connie, when I bet you 90% of us don't even know what the hell a Pulitzer Prize is. Hey? That means MVP. MVP in the writer's world. But I remember that moment she talked about at the final report. And I tried to sneak out one of the back doors, basement doors of that convention center, wherever it was we were in Ottawa at that time. And I ran, the people I was sneaking away from was a scrum of the media. And I get down there and I got surrounded. But there's only one person I recognized. It was Connie. So I told all those people, get away. Nobody here is getting an interview except her. Connie got the exclusive. I never seen it on a national news, so they probably thought I was bullshitting them. And that's okay with me. Connie got the story. But I just want to say to all you children of, you've never stepped foot in a residential school, but you've had our hearts and your hearts connect. And this young woman warrior and her sisters, there's so many of you out there right now. You are inheriting a responsibility that's going to be difficult to carry on. But if us old folk can survive the everyday threat of physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual abuse, we know that you're armored with gatherings like this to take our strength and our spirit strength and find that space, that ethical space to move this truth forward. Don't take shortcuts. Reconciliation is an end dream. Majority of us in this room will never see that day. It's more important that we reconcile amongst ourselves, amongst our families, with the feuds that are out there that we don't even know what started them. Because we don't want these warriors like Connie and my children and your grandchildren and your chaplains going and continuing and living with this. So I'm more than proud, more than honored to be able to observe and bear witness to Connie and her family and her band members covering her with this blanket. Majority of them are women, because when we come out of the womb, who takes care of us? It's a woman that wraps us in a blanket. We can never forget that. In closing, I just want to applaud Jennifer and all of the staff, all of the participants in this conference. I heard some of my fellow survivors, one of them said to me, I really enjoyed this conference except for the food. I said, my friend, right where we're sitting having this cigarette, there are people walking in front of us, our people. Some of them haven't eaten for days, changed clothes for a week, asking us for cigarettes. I said, before we complain about the food, before we complain about anything, you just remember we have a place to sleep, we can travel, we have clean clothes. And even though we're being served stale sandwiches here, at least we have something in our stomach, and it's a hell of a lot better than the food we got served in residential school. So I applaud all of the workers, all the vendors, and all the people. But us as residential school survivors, I want to encourage all of us to count our blessings. Most of us never thought we'd be here to see this day when this issue would be dealt with, much less have a gathering nationally where we can share our feelings in a safe space and go home and report to our communities and our families that we feel better. Or if we feel worse, at least we know what we can look forward to. Actually, no. How about a nice round of applause for Connie? I think myself, I'm going to start standing ovation for our Pulitzer Prize winner, Connie Mike, the best in the business. Hi, hi.
Let's give Eugene a big round of applause, and Lorna and all her family members. Congratulations, Connie. Well deserved. In our industry, it's hard to try and explain our truths, especially when you have the upper management dousing us. And I know Connie has had that issue as well, where, you know, I took the concept of the Indian Act to CBC and told them that the survivors and the residential school story is real. And they still didn't believe me. And, you know, for Connie to get this award and to receive the blanket and all of this, it's pretty important for her and pretty important for us journalists, because our hope is that, let's give them another big round of applause as she's leaving. Our hope is that all of the survivors in this room, you keep your testimony as strong and as clear as you can, because one day a film crew will come and ask you too, what do you think? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to troubleshoot this? And without your input, we would be blind going in, because we knew something as a Indigenous woman whose parents went to residential school. I went to day school. I have so many families, siblings that went to school. If I had the chance to ask my late father before he left, and I just started in the business, if I had a chance to ask him, what happened to you? I don't know what he would say, but I interviewed a lot of his friends, and I can kind of get it. So with saying that, I just want to commend you for your strength, your sisterhood, your brotherhood, the community that come together. And to make this event as amazing as it has been for all of us, I want to thank the sponsors. Oh my goodness, the sponsors and all of the booths. If you're a crafter and you have stuff for sale in any of these booths, give yourselves a big round of applause, because that just that alone, because it was against the law for us to even craft anything. For 67 years, it was against the law for us to even bead earrings. So we've come a long way, and according to Spirit, we can expedite this somehow. And so that's the goal, is that let's keep gathering, let's keep sharing, let's keep meeting in these environments. And so I'd like to call on my sister Jennifer Wood to please make her way up. And I think it's really important that we hear from her. And you know, I don't know if you guys know that story about Jennifer and Darcy. Am I allowed to say it? But they actually are the greatest love story of all. They met at the Portage Residential School, and you know, kind of kimooching, I guess, eh? Darcy, you'd say, back in the day. You guys were allowed to talk then? Yeah? Anyway, they got married. They're the most beautiful story that ever came from Indian Residential School, and they dedicated their life to telling the truth and standing by all of us and making sure that we know what happened and we will never forget. So I'd like to ask my sister Jen to please make her way up as she gives us the final closing remarks today. Join me.
I wanted a box to stand on, but I forgot to ask.
I wanted. Hello? Can you hear me? I sound like Dr. Gabor. I was sharing with someone the other night that it's one thing to plan and organize a conference gathering. It's another one to see it in reality. Because a conference planner's worst nightmare is that no one's going to show up, believe it or not. That's reality. So I want to thank you for your time. Time is a gift. And the gift of time that you've given to me to listen to me, I sincerely appreciate it. I wanted to explain a little bit why we titled it Breaking the Colonial Mindset. Back in 2014, I had an idea. It came to me because I've worked with survivors for 10 years out of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I am a third-generational survivor. My grandmother, my mother, 5 of my siblings, and myself. And believe me, we are the ultimate products of the schools. So I've always been bothered by the fact of our definition that defines us in the Indian Act. My father was an avid reader. And when I started the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs residential school file with the settlement agreement, and Eva knows how complex that was, I asked my dad, I said, I've got to do presentations and I need to understand how could our nation be abused? How could an entire people be abused? How did that happen? He said, well, you know our definition in the Indian Act. I said, no, I don't. He says, we're defined anything other than a person or persons. When I understood that, it set me on a path to do my presentation, to reflect the truth, and to have that as my basis of my presentation so that I could understand the reality of why we are treated the way we are. Taken off in cattle trucks, getting our head shaved, sexually abused, stripped of our clothes. On and on and on, I had to realize that. So I have to always talk from that basis. So in 2014, around there, I said I want to do a conference called Breaking the Colonial Perception. And when I met with Dr. Gabor in Vancouver in January, he said, how about breaking the colonial mindset? I said, you got it, that sounds better. Because Canada has a perception on our people. How do you break a 150-year perception? How do you break it? How do you deal with it? And in the same line, on another level, we got colonized in the process by Canada's legislations of how they defined us and how they perceive us and how they talk to us and how the institutions dealt with us and how the superintendents looked at us. Then I started doing some research and I came upon a book by, last name is Dobbs, A Child's Self-Perception Emerges from the Way He Thinks You See Him. And we know darn well how we felt. We don't even have to be told. That look from that person tells us how they feel about us. And I always kept that mindful when I'm talking with survivors, because I know how we feel. So that's the meaning behind breaking the colonial mindset. We have to break those perceptions on the social agencies, on the organizations, on the institutions, on the hospitals, in the law force. Every level we have to break that perception because we have a repetitive door of our people going through them. And I want those agencies that I just named to realize it's not happening to us it's not because we want to be like this, it's because we've endured all these harms and legacies that have been placed upon us. And I want them to know that, and I want them to break that perception on us and deal with us as humans. That's why that was the title. So on behalf of the NCTR, last March, talking with Stephanie Scott, the executive director, everyone knows that I love putting on gatherings. And I said, we must put on a gathering for survivors who have been isolated, in anguish, enduring loss of family, enduring so many things. It paralyzed the entire world. And to hear the RHSW speak today, it reminded me how much we were affected and impacted by the COVID epidemic. And I'm really happy about this panel. My husband here, Darcy Wood, I've met him in 1973 in Portage la Prairie. I was 13, he was 16. He said he was waiting for me to grow up. I'm like, what do you mean by that? We have 11 grandchildren and 2 daughters. So before I go on with my closing remarks, I need to see my right arm, Jaron Hart. Where is he? Jaron Hart. Jaron Hart is my right arm that came on, and I believe he was sent to me by Creator. Doing this conference is exceptionally a lot of hard work, and I knew I had to count on someone. And so I started thinking about Jaron and messaging him and got him on contract. Lo and behold, a position came up at NCTR. He is now a full-time staff. I need you to give privilege and a warm applause for Jaron Hart, my right arm, wherever he is. So having Dr. Gabor here was, again, I believe we had help from above, because he had first said no to the request because we had to change the date twice. So the last time I asked, he said he's on family, that's his family special time. So in Vancouver in January, I had his cell number. I said, I still want to meet with you and talk to you about this gathering that we're putting on. It was an hour long in a restaurant in Vancouver somewhere. At the end of that hour, he said, I will not only do a keynote, I will do a workshop for you. He says, and waive my fee. He says, my passion is for survivors. So over the course of all the conference, all the workshops that we had, they were well thought through why we should have these type of workshop speakers. Dennis Windigo, Lance Scout, Eva Wilson, Viola Thomas, Shadow Therapy, the Three Windies, Ruth Murdoch. All of these people are healing people. And I wanted the basis to be talked about trauma that needs to be the first point of discussion when you go see your doctor and how you're feeling. We're all triggered, I said we're birthed into trauma. But what I learned over the course of this workshop is that medicine is inside all of us. I don't know who said it. We are not what happened to us. We are way more than that by the mere fact that we are standing and in this room today. What I want us to do when we leave here, I want us to work on our shame, to work on our guilt. We shouldn't have to carry that. We shouldn't have to live with that. We have to break it somehow. We have to break it. That little chair there, we needed a little chair to represent the children that are missing, the children that have not come home, the children. That's my little grandson's chair, Odin. And I thought, that's what I'm striving for. I do not want him to endure what our survivors have. Allow healing to happen. Allow it to happen. I know darn well that we can't even talk about anything. Even I'm an example of that. I got triggered. My sister got triggered. She came in from Kitchener, residential school survivor from Spanish. Her number was 347, and all of my 4 others. All numbered, degraded, She said we had clothes on underneath and we had to be cloaked in these gray things and cut the hair off. I said, that is not going to happen. And she came from that workshop with Dr. Gabor. She said, we provided an avenue of healing here. We provided an avenue of healing here. I hope when everyone goes back to their community that you seek out emotional support, that you start to look at yourself, that you are just as good as your next person next to you. What Colby Tatousis talked about last night, that's our next generation, that leader last night. I know all of his family. His grandfather was the supervisor at Portage Residential School. His kukum he was talking about was one of the staff inside the residential school, and I felt good because she was a First Nations woman working there. I think Peter Yellowquill is here somewhere too, from Portage Residential School, which is 50 miles from here. And the reality of all of this is that as small as Portage La Prairie is, nobody even knew there was a residential school at the end of Crescent Avenue. So in closing, I want to thank everyone that came. I know you came far. For those that are here till 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock, I'm sorry about your flights. We try to include everything we can, but everyone knows that you can only do what's in your capacity. There's that VIP lounge on the main level. Down the escalators, go to your right. There's a beautiful room there with couches. Take your luggage there. We'll make sure you have coffee. You know, Honorable Sinclair, when he spoke, I took some notes. He said when they traveled across Canada with the TRC commissioners to tell the truth, I think it was for 6 years. He said it was really hard to get the survivors to tell the truth. It's going to be even harder to achieve reconciliation. So this came to me. Everybody knows I love Facebook. I love posting. And when things come to me, I write them down. So here's what came to me. I don't know when this was, a couple of months ago, but I want to end on this because this came to me. Everyone knows their own pain. We must be mindful that we all walk in different paths. Trauma was a big part of most of our lives. We became desensitized at what we thought was normal. We all witnessed things we shouldn't have as children due to the effects of residential school. We all never heard the words, "I love you," or embraced a warm hug. But somehow we all grew up to become loving parents. We were not broken, but made stronger, determined to make a good life for our children. We have a lot to be proud of. Give yourselves a pat on the back for getting through everything you did and can still smile and love back. Turn your pain into power. Chimigwach.
So Eva wanted me to remind everybody that as you leave today, there's smudging outside there just as you're leaving. Dang, what did Jen say? What did you say? Oh yeah, Barb Cameron, my relative over there from Long Plain. I believe she's still here. We're gonna call her. She's gonna stay at her seat. Oh, right over there. she's going to stay at her seat and provide the closing prayer. And then I'm going to ask Sons of the Drum to play that special song from their songbook that reminds us that, sure, we're going to miss each other and we'll see each other soon and we'll be back together one day, and stay happy. And it's not a sad song, it's a bit of a traveling song, but it's meant to leave us on a high note. So feel free to come around the drum, feel free to take pictures. You guys are so amazing, and how you stayed so calm all these years is beyond me, because my generation and the generation before me and after me, they're pretty mad. So we got plans to continue the stories. We got plans to continue telling these stories through feature films, TV shows, all on online media outlets, like whatever it is. So I'm going to ask my relative over there, Barb Cameron, to please stand up. And I'm going to ask you one more time to please rise as she finishes the day in a good way and sending us off in prayer this way.
Bonjour, tēnā maganeduk. Nigane benesi kwendish nikas. Mino bagone gijik, dijik kenimigo. An schnabe kwenin. Kagi ge mede kwenin. Kaganos kodyak. Kenin, dijagwigo. Ogedaki gijinikade. Kagi dajum begi wana benunjian. Shkoninganing gijigots. Gijigos a minjibo. Tabastani gonigan genin. Jantakina magon. My relatives, my name is Barb Cameron. My spirit name, my first spirit name is Nigani Venesikwa, female leader of the Thunderbirds. My second spirit name is one I received when I passed a few years ago, but came back. And my second spirit name is Bagonegijik, which means a hole in the sky. That hole in the sky that I'm going to talk about and where we come from. And I needed to say that as my intro. And my message of hope before I say the prayer is this. I want to share with you a message of hope through the wisdom and guidance of teachings that have been given to me ever since I joined a lodge when I was a younger woman. And these teachings were given to me over a lifetime up to the day that I sit here. And I'll weave some of those teachings in and out, but this came to me this morning as well. We as Anishinaabe people, we've come through a portal in the sky, and that portal is Bagonegijik. And how appropriate is it that I speak of this? That Bagonegijik is that hole in the sky, and we come from the spirit world to earth through that portal. And we go back home to the spirit world through that same portal. But we come here with a mission, a responsibility while we're here. And we've done that work through extreme hardship on the face of this earth. Our ancestors did it too. We have done that fight. Wounded, but still standing. Gizongigabwemen. We have done that fight, and many will talk about that word, Ogijda. Ogijda ikwe. Ogijda inene. And what that word means is warrior. And I needed to say that so that you understand what you've done here on earth.
be aware that when we come here, we come with a spirit inside of all of us. Our spirit was with us throughout our time while we were in the residential schools and helped us through all of it, and is still with us today as we are in this room. So with humble gratitude and kindness, I ask that you embrace your spirit. Say miigwech to your spirit. Express your love to your spirit. And when you are ready in your own time, do your own ceremony honoring your spirit, maybe even feasting. Whatever works for you. Remember that I love you, we love you, our ancestors love you. Gijay Manido loves you. Miminik Kwek Duan, and I'll do the prayer. Gijay Manido, Sama Giminigo, Chigipa Manuega, Maminika Mamu Biang, where Minikatas in the Mange, Gawis Tagishkagwang. Shemanido, when I get on the me, what Sheniman Kainangi Miangoma, a king of Majayang, Chip Makamigis young ma. Quakamik Goga Bijang, Kinigego Yoshan. Chipo pushke mama bija da gushnang marking. And the son danemak. Wabanong nakakya. Me mama oi. Can you gonna but a bit kagane squandered? Kinigiat sukanak ni mishusananak no kumisak kinimagabiat. I think it's me which. Mina wa deji jaunong. Mi mawa pichiga na batabet. Kaganesh kondet. Mi go ech kishamanido. Ka gigya pane banigo ke winima kya biotigek. Mi wa deji ningabianong. Ningabianong wa diga ni shan jama chang api nagatakyang. Mi wa digit naimagan nanak. Kabigwang. Mi wonji jawada kiwedeno. E kuksinak. Mi dawe wopske makwa. Kana batabet kagane dengi eshkondem. Mi gwech kishamani do kenagoma. Mi shonjega kagige gasado. Ni nentunje bemadizinan. Jashob Miguizang. Miguizi Bejigo Noe Mama Nanake. Ka Giga Panebaniga Gawin in Jayat. Kenigeugan Tiger Toot. Mijam Mino Mashkikunan. Chun Jimino Ayang. Jiminop Madzang Maki. Yeshquade. Chawazwang, Genesatamang, Uganani Shkoda. Ugo always sick, Miss Yegap Mayat. Anen gap Mosyat, gap Mebatwat, gap Marshot, gap Kapapama Rosigot, Kapapamudiot. Miga always sick, Migwech, Gawi no ma. Bimadizina ya moato maki. Minoni be. Saigan and Minazi being cinema. Kap mejongen marking. A pushke go yeg chigamigo. Canadian maga asha me shonjogagi na twed. Mi ma went out your wang. 미과치 기셔만 해도 기니게고 마 기관스든 집어다고 신앙 시구에 농공모에 가위기바만we awewe asho mama menikawi maga kayat odne maganyon ogo abinon jekka oga tagindo ogo ano dujigo ge oga kondamat ano jigo jiji iskagwat ikwe kagagwatagint ikwe kanisent ikwe kan shiba peneniment. Ashom kinawi agishamanito. Chiminota kushnot, ante ko gewi no when the khan is yat. Magja pakan, jishan nana gadukyot, pakan, odeyong jimin mwat we. Ogonen we gan suttamang when yogon minikka gan batabyang. When young qua meganem, shawenem, a shom. Miminekidan mam, a joenimishnam gijamanido, a joenimishnam gijamanido, a joenimishnam gijamanido, a joenimishnam gijamanido, nikanigana.
Thank you, Barb. I'll ask Sons of the Drum now to start the song that we'll walk together, we'll cry together, and we'll see each other really, really soon. Don't be sad. That's what that song is telling us. So take it away, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Sons of the Drum. Please be careful as you're traveling. And Northwest Territories Yukon people, Inuit delegation meet by the teepee for pictures. Long planers go straight back to the res. Just kidding. Sapatoyak, you too. Dupshko, Sandy Bay, go back straight to the res. So the kukum scarves on the table and the flowers at the table. The kukum scarves were put there and placed there specifically as a request, if you will, to honor the relationship that we've always had with Ukrainian seniors and the women. So in honor of their suffering and what they're going through right now, we put the kukum scarves on the table. So feel free to take your kukum scarf home. Don't fight over it if you're sitting with more than one person. I don't have the authority to break up fights. And the flowers on the tables. Please feel free to take them home. The flowers on the table. The vases too? Dang. Awesome. And we'll see you guys real soon. It's been a pleasure being your mistress and mistress of ceremonies. I've had a great time keeping you informed and keeping us on track. Chimigwich, and thank you.
Siguli swagwag, galahindi neogat, swagi sliwagi niwakitaloda, unida gungwa wenege, ani bojo, dante, okinapi. How? So I hope you enjoyed that. I wasn't sure again today whether I'd be up up in time to get that running on stream because I know that they started, and I was hoping I would be up. So I did, and I'm glad. I will post that VOD, ensure that it is available for anybody who missed any of it, and or people who just want to rewatch it. Also, want a quick reminder that for those of you who didn't notice, I've added a sticker option to our channel for you, and a majority of the stickers that I have added are the flags of our people. So there's a Hawaiian flag, there's an Australian flag, there's a Maori flag, a Cherokee, Apache, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Sioux. So I tried to include as many as I could, as I have space for, and so you'll see those. You have the option to pop those up. I've made them free, so you don't. You're not required to use bits or anything to use those flags. So whenever you feel so inclined, don't hesitate to use those if you wish. And so there's a couple of them there. Also, a reminder: September on September 30th is going to be in what we call the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So for September, we're going to really be sharing some of the information related to the history of residential school systems, and primarily because a lot of people are not fully aware of what actually happened in these schools, or what we. So schools is a very loose term, and as one of the elders, the survivors, said in the speech, she called them institutions of genocide. Ultimately, is what they were, and because they were they were meant to remove our culture, our traditions, and our teachings, and they were meant to assimilate us into this Western mentality, which essentially is what it is. It's eliminating a group of people is a genocide, and that's ultimately what the schools and these institutions were intended to do. So we'll share some documentaries. I'm working on trying to find an elder that I can have come on and talk to us and answer questions and maybe give some information about any kind of personal experiences that they might have in those cases. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to play a rendition of The Peaceful Warrior as we end all streams with, and then I'll look for someone to raid out to, and so I hope that you will all stick around at least long enough to come over and say hello to whoever we go see. So in the meantime, I will get my mug off the screen here, and we'll let's see. We'll do a jazzy version of The Peaceful Warrior tonight, and this is a couple called The Bylines. And if you like them, I'll put the link to their channel in the chat as well so that you can follow them.
Our names are Marin Reese, and we're at war for peace. All senseless attacks we see must cease. What are we doing here? What do we really want to say? This world has got to change its way. We're going to battle for the red, white, yellow, and black. Fight for the ones who can't fight back. Oh, we're talking about all the creatures from the water to the sky. Talking about the issues from the truth to the lies. Gonna make my stand with a paper and a pen. You wanna argue that? Go back to bed again. 'Cause you're never gonna win against what I stand for. So sit down and shut up and listen as I give my grand tour. I'm gonna target the corruption in our government, target the poison in our environment, the injustices to the people. And every target I won't keep still. Gonna battle the battle of battles, shake up the cage till it rattles. 'Cause you'll never get rid of me till all of us are free. Our names are Marin Reese, and we're at war for peace. All senseless attacks we see must cease. Gonna fight for the red, white, yellow, and black. Gonna fight for the ones who can't fight back. Let's keep passing around information, improve the planet through education. Make the people aware, make everybody care. Pass my message on if you dare. Mine or yours, we all gotta share. There's more power in one person's voice than any weapon of choice. Our names are Marin Reese, and we're at war for peace. All senseless attacks we see must cease. But we won't be able to move this world all alone. Just remember, this is also your home. So if I put my voice with your voice, and we all shout together, people are gonna hear us. Things are gonna get better. Our names are Mary.
Gay wedding
You
group
never
that
see
wants
it
to make a wedding.